Good afternoon from Istanbul. It's unusually rainy and chilly for late May in Istanbul. It's like a Brussels weather. My name is Barça İnanç. I'm a journalist writing for the English language Hürriyet Daily News. TÜSİAD, Institut du Bosphore, and Berlin Bosphorus Initiative have jointly launched a 3-session webinar series entitled Beyond the Headlines, The Future of Europe. And today is the second edition where we will be talking about Turkish-EU relations. As I said, I'm a journalist, and ever since I've started journalism some 3 decades ago, I've been covering Turkish-EU relations, and this has been a stormy relationship with ups and downs, with occasional sunshines, but mostly thunderstorms and tornadoes. It has faced a lot of challenges, political, economic, even social, cultural challenges. And as if we didn't have enough on our plate, we're now facing a new challenge called the Covid-19. The world has already started talking about the post-Covid-19 era. We are talking about the new normal. Well, I have never seen anything normal in Turkish-EU relations, but every occasion, every crisis comes with its occasion. So we will be talking about how the new normal will be in terms of EU integration and how that might look like for Turkish-EU relations. And to discuss this, I'm joined from 3 capitals by 3 guests. From London, Mustafa Kutlay, who is a lecturer at the Department of International Politics, City University of London. From Berlin, Dr. Günther Seufert, who is the director of the Center for Applied Turkey Studies at SWP, which is a German Institute for International and Security Affairs. And from Brussels, we're joined by Nacho Sanchez Amor, who is the member of the European Parliament and who has the pleasant task of being a rapporteur for Turkey. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. And before I proceed with Mustafa Kutlay, I'm sure our participants by now has gained experience following webinars in the new normal of our times. And but to remind them, at the bottom of your screen, you have the Q&A button where when you push and you can write your questions, and we will try to answer them in the second part of the webinar. Now, Mustafa Kutlay, in December 2019, just about when the COVID-19 was making itself felt in China, Institut du Bosphore has published a policy paper where you have written how global power shifts will or can affect Turkish-EU relations. Now, tell us in what sense COVID-19 has affected your conclusions. How do you think EU will adapt in the post-COVID-19 era, and where will we see Turkish-EU relations evolve?
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. You're absolutely right. I mean, the COVID-19 crisis is clearly an unprecedented challenge for several countries across the world, including EU member states and Turkey. And I think it's safe to assume that the crisis will pose a kind of turning point or a critical juncture in terms of state-market and state-society relations. But my understanding is that this pandemic makes existing fault lines in international system, international order, and European integration much more pronounced, rather than paving the way for an entirely new system or paradigm. So the question, I think, is what kind of international shifts are we going through, and what it means for the future of European integration and Turkey-EU relations? Well, I would suggest that this was also my argument in this policy paper. I would suggest that we are living in an age of hybridity, which signifies that there are no overriding set of paradigms dominating global governance. Instead, we have a complex network of competing norms, which creates opportunities as well as instability, uncertainty, and challenges. By competing norms and values, I mean that in this new age of hybridity, liberal international order is being challenged. I mean, democratic capitalism is under severe test. Rule-based multilateralism are being tested right now. On the one hand, particularly in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis and Eurozone crisis, we see that liberal democracies and free market economy paradigm is in a challenge. And on the other side, we see that non-Western great powers, first and foremost China, are promoting an alternative paradigm, which can be called as state capitalism or authoritarian capitalism. It has a distinct economic system promoting state intervention in the economy in a constant basis. And from a political point of view, it refers to illiberal governance models. So this is a kind of challenge because up until 2008 global financial crisis, perhaps after the Cold War, we observed the spectacular expansion of liberal international order. And European Union was part of this order, one of the key actors. And the transformative capacity or normative power credentials of the European Union were quite high. And the EU's transformative capacity over third countries, including candidate states or others, was quite high. But now we see that this shifting international order or age of hybridity poses a kind of challenge for the EU in terms of external actors. But from another point of view, it also, I think, creates opportunities for the EU to become a strategically autonomous actor and defend rule-based international order or democratic capitalism, if you like. So there are both opportunities and challenges, I like to suggest. But the key point or the bottom line is that democratic capitalism appears no longer the only game in town. That's the most important, I think, issue when I say we are living in an age of hybridity. Then the question is, what does this mean for Turkey relations? Well, to start with, I would suggest that due to the multiple crises of the EU, I mean the irregular migration challenge, Brexit issue, rising illiberalism in some member and candidate countries, and on top of that, as you mentioned, COVID-19 crisis, these all paved the way for a kind of equilibrium in the EU. And as a result, the European Union currently operates in a kind of survival mode, for understandable reason, prioritizing institutional reorganization rather than enlargement. And when we look at the issue from Turkey's point of view as well, and we can suggest that due to the current political situation in the country, in Turkey, membership appears an unlikely option, at least for the time being. That being said, the parties need each other. That is also, I think, quite clear because the EU needs Turkey in terms of becoming an important orbit in defending rule-based international order, especially in the post-COVID-19 work. And from Turkey's point of view as well, I mean, in order to ensure long-term economic and political development, EU norms, values, and conditionality still matter. So the parties need each other. Then I think this brings a question, an important question to the fore. If full membership is not on the horizon in the relevant future, and if conventional political conditionality falls short of incentivizing Turkish ruling elites, then how could parties steer a course out of the current stalemate? I think that is the most important question right now in Turkey relations. To be honest with you, I don't have a clear-cut answer to this question, but I think a concept might be useful to contribute to the debate, which is differentiated integration. As you know, this concept is becoming increasingly popular among scholars of European studies. It basically refers to alternative modalities of cooperation. When it comes to Turkey relations, for instance, it might refer to a cooperation when it comes to foreign trade and investment through a modified customs union agreement, a visa and migration regime through a series of interrelated arrangements, or perhaps a foreign policy and security regime through institutionalized decision-making procedures. So these areas, in my opinion, are the main fields where large winning coalitions can be established or formed on both sides. However, I will suggest that that's going to be my final remarks in this short intervention. However, I will suggest that differentiated integration should be interpreted cautiously for two main reasons. I mean, first of all, from a technical point of view, differentiated integration is not a clear concept for candidate countries. I mean, for member states, it might be an option to opt in certain policy areas and opt out in certain others. I mean, the EU's institutional architecture enables this. But it does not provide much space for non-members to participate in the EU if they are willing to opt in. I mean, the EU's legal architecture does not seem to enable such a kind of flexible integration scheme for candidate countries. So this needs to be sorted out. I mean, this is the first issue. And the second caveat is that the notion of differentiated integration in Turkey-EU relations, I think, might pave the way for the rise of transactionalism, which means that the parties might cooperate in certain policy areas based on their short-term, narrow interests. I mean, there is nothing wrong in this. I mean, all states are prioritizing their interests. But the thing is that if this kind of transactionalism crowds out the normative credentials, I mean, the political conditionality, norms and values in bilateral relations, I think that's going to be harmful for both sides because it will damage EU's external actorness, normative power credentials in the medium and long term. And from Turkey's point of view, it's not going to provide the required institutional background in order to further or improve Turkey's economic and political development. So this differentiated integration concept might be useful, but the renewed cooperation in Turkey relations should keep core European values and norms as key organizing principles in bilateral partnership. And that's my understanding. My final comment, whether a new cooperation framework along these lines could be crafted, I think this is an open-ended question right now, and I'd be more than happy to discuss in detail in the Q&A session. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to two main factors. First, it depends on the capacity of the EU political elite and political willingness, whether they are ready to restructure the European Union to make it a relevant actor in an age of hybridity, which is increasingly post-Western and post-liberal. And it also depends on the Turkish ruling elites to decide on which side of international system they think Turkey should stand in a shifting international order, whether being part of rule-based international order, promoting liberal democracy and free market economy, or whether becoming part of state capitalist practices, being part of these protectionist tendencies, all sort of stuff. So I would like to stop here, and I would be more than happy to discuss in detail, as I said, in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kutlay. You've talked about the leadership that the political elites in Europe have to take place, and one of these elites stand in Berlin. So let's move to Berlin. Mr. Günther Seufert, as I said, you're the head of the Center for Applied Turkey Studies, and this is a brand new center. It's not. It's just 10 month old. Now we know that Mrs. Angela Merkel has never been an EU enthusiast. In fact, the other day I was hearing at a webinar someone saying that she has never invested emotionally in the European Union. Having said that, she played a very important role. And for instance, in this COVID-19 crisis, after an initial hesitation, she has joined Macron on supporting a major recovery fund. What does this tell us in terms of what kind of a legacy Merkel will leave behind, because she would be leaving politics next year, and obviously where the Turkish-EU relations would evolve in this legacy? We're listening to you.
Yes, thank you also for the invitation. First, let me say that I'm not agreeing when you are saying that Mrs. Merkel was not very enthusiastic about the European Union. I have the complete contrary impression. I think we have both been in the refugee crisis and in the euro crisis, and also in the COVID crisis, that she tried against the resistance in Germany itself for more burden sharing to stick to help the European Union together. And I think what you said, particularly in your last sentence, that she has now agreed with Macron on this package of credits and subsidies. And I think this shows that she is really trying to bridge the deepened north-south divide we have seen. in the European Union. It's not the first time that this North-South divide is emerging. It was also there in the Euro crisis, but we've seen it has deepened, and we've seen that it has now the southern camp, so to speak, has also grown now, including also France, including Belgium, including Luxembourg, including Slovenia, all states that ask now for more financial solidarity. And naturally, there is reason for it, because it was particularly, as we know, for Italy, Spain, and to a lesser extent France, that was mostly affected by the COVID crisis. And these are all states that depend heavily on tourism, and that have to face now both the setbacks in tourism and the setbacks in industrial production. And therefore, we see there is reason for the call for more financial solidarity, but we have on the other side, we have the frugal four: Austria, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Finland. And I think Germany has really, and it will do this, it will struggle for this in the coming rotating presidency of Germany starting in July, to build bridges and to try to hold the European Union together. And I think we also will see that during these German rotating presidency, naturally to fight both the pandemic, but also to try to support European recovery economically, will be the main agenda. There are other points on the agenda, naturally, points that cannot be postponed. It's how to structure the relationship with the UK after Brexit, how to continue with the fishery quotas that go up, that will end at the end of this year, and naturally also these ambitious goals that had been formulated before the crisis: the Green Deal, industrial strategy, reform of the common asylum system. But to say again some words about fighting COVID, I think there will be a strong impetus in the German rotating presidency of strengthening the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control by giving more finance and staff to it. But also Merkel has said she will try to develop equal standard of health system in different European countries to prevent that in a foreseeable second wave, again, hotspots may occur in different countries. I think this will be the case, and that to prevent, to enable the health systems to fight these second wave, to avoid that again borders are closed, and that again the inter-European trade and the inter-European possibility of peoples to commute freely, that this again will be put into question. Now, I think when it comes to Turkey, we see there are two. First, I think we have to acknowledge that in the discussions here in Berlin about the agenda of the German rotating presidency, Turkey is not mentioned at a very significant, very priority, in a prioritative way. But I think there are two issues. One is the discussion on the delocalization of the production facilities of medtech, of protective gear, and naturally of medicines and medications back or closer to Europe. And the other is naturally the reform of the European asylum system. I think in these two issues, Turkey will be on the agenda. But I fully agree with Mr. Kutlai that the way in which there is it's a question if there is a possibility to come to terms with Turkey very much also depends on the positioning of the Turkish elite.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seufert. I'm going to pick up on that point, actually. Mr. Sanchez, let's go to Brussels now. Southern countries have been critical of EU not taking timely action during the COVID-19 initial days now. We know that France and Germany, they've sent medical assistance lately, and then the EU, provided apologies, and now Germany and France are pushing for a recovery fund. But no doubt there is some kind of a bitter taste left, most probably among the populations in the southern sphere. And in this framework, you have Turkey, who has been, sending medical assistance, going on a charm offensive, and it's like a country which has survived many troubles, earthquake, failed coup d'etats, even an unprecedented health crisis. Yet its production is continuing. There is this impression in Turkey that it might sort of want to replace China as a more trustable supplier in the supply chain. So I'm wondering, how this bitterness in the southern countries might shape the post-COVID-19 EU, and B, how whether there is an opportunity for Turkey, presenting itself as an asset in times of crisis, which might serve as an icebreaker in the relations.
No, thank you. Very interesting and stimulating introduction from my colleagues that I would like to react later. This bitterness is completely different than the bitterness we suffered after the former crisis. When the financial and sovereign debt crisis, the European Union took a couple of years to react clearly and to create a fund. And now we just use a couple of months. For that reason, that the situation is completely different than what happened in the past. And there is a clear sense that that period, that dark period of the European life, during that years of the financial crisis, has been completely overcome. And now the reaction has been clear and fast. Because the reaction on sure, the mechanism for the unemployed, the mechanism on the central bank has been immediately put forward. The measures on trying to relieve the situation of the airlines has been immediately stated and legislated. And now we have an enormous amount of money and resources that have been announced yesterday in the Parliament. For that reason, we can compare the European reaction in this occasion to what happened in the past. It's completely different. The voice of the countries of the South, Italy and Spain, mainly has been heard clear, and at that time in the past we hadn't the means to do that. Now the case has been completely different. And now the whole European Union heard from Spain and from Italy the same way that we heard from Holland or Denmark, in the same, let's say, political stance, without any doubt of the right of anyone to defend their interests. For that reason, now the feeling is not about bitterness, but on the contrary, it's completely hope, because we finally saw an European Union reacting promptly and reacting effectively and with a profound sense of urgency, and it's completely different. Now about Turkey as an asset. The question that I have to deal with in my position as a rapporteur in Turkey is every time I have contact with my Turkish interlocutors, the question is to cut in pieces the relation. That could be wise, of course, could be useful even. But now you are asking about this idea. Turkey has sent a lot of medical equipment. In other cases, there were some problems we got. In the case of Spain, we received some aid from Turkey, but in a few days later, we had a plane blocked in Turkey with ventilators and so on. But anyway, let's go to the core of the issue. The question is, Turkey has to decide if the format of our relation is the accession process or not, of is other one. For example, as you are proposing now, why can we concentrate in custom union? Why can we explore the Turkey as an asset to join the value chains in Europe, not only in medical equipment, in general, or are we going to the visa liberalization? But the question is, for Europe, the relation with Turkey is a complex unity, and we can simply cut in pieces and say, okay, because the accession process is stuck, let's go to the custom union. Well, because we are now bickering in World Trade Organization about some technical issues. Let's put apart the custom union and let's go to this way of the incorporated Turkey in the change, the value change in Europe. For us, we can't simply act that way. And when my Turkish interlocutor said, why the question of the foreign affairs, of the foreign policy of Turkey affecting the relation with the European Union? Because for us, it's quite complicated to cut in pieces our relation. And if the foreign policy of Turkey is not, I can ask, we don't ask for an alignment, but at least not to spread completely from our point of view over the world, these kind of things are affecting the relation. And it's the same with human rights and rule of law. Okay, we know, my Turkish interlocutor, we know we have issues on rule of law and human rights. Let's put that thing apart and let's talk about tariffs in custom union. We simply can't, because our analysis about Turkey is to examine the complete frame of the relations. And in that sense, what happened in the last period is not very hoping, because we have been the problems in the question of human rights and rule of law. I don't want to insist, but the drillings in Cyprus or in East Mediterranean, Syria, Libya, S-400, and everything what happened, everything what my colleagues heard in the parliament about Turkey for the last year is always bad things, bad news. And that creates an ambience, that creates an atmosphere. And even when we talk about sending money to the refugees, there is a simple and mistaken, but very, very, very profound vision in Europe. This is money for Erdogan, and this is forbidden. And it is costly to pass the message that some money we are sending to Turkey is for the refugees, is for the necessities, is for geopolitical reasons. We as a Spaniard, we have a Patriot missile equipment in Turkey, but anything going to Turkey is suspicious, because our way to examine the relation is a complete picture of the relation. And for that reason, when I talk to my business world colleagues in Turkey, I could understand perfectly your insistence in the custom union. And even the European Parliament, with my predecessor, Kati Piri, we let an open door to the custom union discussions a couple of years ago. Now things had not improved, on the contrary. And now I'm not sure if I am going to be able to maintain that narrow window open in my next report, because the atmosphere is completely critical towards Turkey. And there is sometimes in a very confusing and mistaken way, in other dossiers, completely right. But I would like to say just a couple of things on my colleagues. Merkel is not an European patriot. Merkel is not an European nationalist, but Merkel is a completely pro-European politician. Let's say it's an analytic, pro-European. But she has done very well in the last years, and there is no doubt for me, coming from the south and from Spain, that Merkel is a crucial asset for the future of the European Union.
Okay.
And concerning the Professor Kitlay, it's very, very exciting, this idea, very stimulating idea of the hybridism of that moment. But Turkey has to examine, if you want to jump from this illiberal period that you are passing by, to go into a post-liberal period without being a liberal, deep, mature democracy. Because I can understand that that kind of ideas finally could be used. I don't say is the intention of Professor Kutlay. That kind of things reinforce this narrative that the illiberal system dealt better with the crisis, because there are no issues with the human rights. China is the case, has been raised, because China has not to be aware, has not to be uncomfortable cutting with human rights. Apparently, China could deal better with the COVID, of course, hiding numbers and hiding figures. But at the end of that, there's a legitimation of the erosion of the human rights and rule of law. We have to be very, very careful with that ideas that could be used in that sense. I'm not saying in any way that is the idea of the Professor Kutlay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amor. Indeed, Mr. Kutlay, I guess you might want to answer this question. So Mr. Amor says, we cannot have compartmentalized relationship, which sort of challenges your view on differentiated integration. And in that sense, it seems that this could be difficult to have customs union. Whereas, if I'm not mistaken, you, on the other hand, you believe that customs union could be a piste where there could be a winning coalition. But indeed, how can it be a fruitful framework without falling on the trap that differentiated integration could be perceived as a la carte integration? That is, I'll pick the economic integration, but the democratic human rights, take it away. I don't want to have that. How can you, in this
sorry, yeah,
just
Brexit.
We're running out of time.
Okay.
Let's keep it for the quick Q&A. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you very much for this question. First of all, I would like to say a few words about this rise of state capitalism, or the emergence of a kind of post-liberal international order. To be honest with you, I am not a fan of post-liberal international order. If you ask me, of course, democracy is a value in itself and we should defend it, especially in this critical juncture. Defending democracies is, I think, much more important than anything else. So we need to be on that side. This is my personal belief, personal view, and I'm completely on the same page with Mr. Nacho Sanchez on this point of view. But the thing is that from a political economy point of view, we should also analyze the developments without prioritizing our value judgments. What I see is that liberal international order is passing through difficult times, because liberal market economy, liberal democracy, these are challenged in the non-Western world. These are challenged by some of the member countries. For instance, we are talking about Hungary right now, building an illiberal state in the heartland of Europe. And there are other countries, EU member states or candidate countries, becoming increasingly illiberal. So this is a kind of fact, this is a kind of trend. And we need to understand why this is happening and what the European Union can do in order to reverse this nasty trend. That's my point, that's my understanding. And from my point of view, we don't have time to go into the details, but in the long term, I don't think that state capitalist models will survive. I mean, for instance, for Turkey, overcoming middle income trap is an important issue. And in order to ensure this, you don't need only a free flow of capitals or goods. You also need the free flow of ideas. I mean, critical thinking, critical education, and these are all associated with inclusive institutions. First and foremost, suppressing in the country. So that's my understanding, but there's something to say that liberal international order is being challenged, but another thing to suggest that I support this. I don't support these ideas, but this is a fact. That's my point. Regarding differentiated integration, you are absolutely right. I mean, I don't have a clear-cut answer to this question, and I said this. at the end of my brief introductory remarks, because differentiated integration might be a kind of a new ground to improve relations. But if the European Union architecture does not change, if legal instruments are not provided in order to do this, yes, this is not going to be the case. And from Turkey's point of view, I also highlighted that transactionalism is a challenge, is a danger for both sides. It's not going to work for Turkey in the medium and long term, I suppose. It's not going to work for the European Union as well in terms of normative power credentials. So, but what's the alternative? I mean, we need to steer a course out of this stalemate, because the parties, I think, need each other, and we need to find a way. So I'm just trying to think out of the box. I don't have an answer to all these questions. We need to find a way. That's why I suggested that at the end of the day, it depends on the political willingness of both sides. I mean, this is not only about European Union. I know that this is also about the political preferences and choices of the Turkish policymakers. That's my short, perhaps non-answer to this question.
Mr. Seufert, Germany, as you said, Germany will be taking up EU presidency, and we've started having questions as well. So I'm going to mix my questions with the coming questions. So from your answer, you said that Turkey is not taking up so much place on a German presidency. There are two issues that has come up: the asylum policy. Do we understand that there will be a renewed refugee deal, which sort of tells me that Germany would like to continue relations in the transactional form? And there has been also a question from Ceren Aral Desnos, who said, if you could evaluate on how delocalization of medtech could actually play out to render Turkey relevant to EU's agenda.
Thank you. Let me first say some words to this very interesting discussion between Mr. Kutlay and Mr. Amor. I think what Mr. Amor said is completely correctly mirroring the transitionary stage of Turkish-European relations. And I'm sorry to say this, and I would like to insist that there should be only or primarily rule-based relations with Turkey, and I would be happy to be back in the times where the relations between Turkey and Europe had been really in the frame of the membership process. But I think we see, as Mr. Amor rightly said, the membership process is not, at least for the moment, in a stalemate, and it is not going anywhere in the moment. And I think we have to ask ourselves a question: how will our policy towards Turkey be structured in the case Turkey is continuing its present policy? In the case Turkey is not making a clear decision for being in the liberal camp. In the case Turkey is continuing a very challenging foreign policy for some European member states. And I would also say, underline, and I'm sorry to say this, that we are already in the state of transactional relationship with Turkey. Because when we are looking, we are continuing the customs union. And we are continuing the cooperation on migration. We want to have Turkey still in NATO. And we want to have Turkey as a partner in the Western security system. That means we are already in a very complex relationship with Turkey, in which we are more or less forcefully turning a blind eye on the fact that the membership process is not going for the moment anywhere, and we are turning a blind eye on the fact that we are not able to democratize Turkey, to transform Turkey politically, as it was Europe's aim with the membership process, namely to stabilize Turkey economically and to transform it politically. But this is not going to happen in the near future. And how are we going to construct our relations with Turkey, given the fact that Turkey becomes a challenge also for European security, but at the same time, still disposes of a lot of potentials of cooperation. And I think we have to make up our mind if it is necessary to develop the customs union, not as an alternative to the membership process, but as a frame that is maybe gives us more space for cooperation, because I think Europe demands cooperation of Turkey, demands from Turkey to cooperate with Europe. It demands from Turkey to cooperate in the refugee deal. It demands for Turkey to be a security partner. It demands to, in a way, to take into account European member state interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. But what is Europe able to offer Turkey for this, given the fact that membership is not in the cards for the moment? And therefore, I think Europe has to come forward with something really important for Turkey, so that Turkey feels a need again to also take into account European interests. And in my view, this can only be the question or the issue of the willingness to enter into the renegotiations of the customs union, an issue in which Turkey has a great interest, economic interest, an issue that could also lead to strengthening of this part of Turkey's economy that depends on Europe, that is oriented towards Europe, namely the productive industry, and an issue that would be in the interest also of Europe as a whole and of single European member states. And I think
we have lots of questions coming.
Yes, lots of questions coming, but I also see the huge difficulties in going forward in this direction, because I think it was easy for single European member states in the frame of the customs union to develop a joint vision for policies toward Turkey, because every European member state has an interest in a democratic Turkey anchored in the West. But when it comes to economic interests, these interests of single European member states are highly diverse, and the challenges European member states face due to Turkish foreign policy are also highly diverse. That means it will be a huge task to find a common way for the European Union to develop structural relations with Turkey. But I think this is a necessity.
There are lots of questions, so I'm gonna go with Mr. Amor, and there's a question from Bahadır Kale Ağası, who says the pandemic's impact on the global supply chains is not only about trade, but also for logistics, finance, technology, agriculture, tourism, medical services. Less dependency on few sources like China and more localization and diversification is on the horizon. The factor of proximity will become a fundamental criterion in the reorganization of global supply chains. Proximity being defined not only in geographic terms, but also in regulatory, institutional, and political terms. Therefore, may a customs union version 5.0, including the EU's digital market, Green Deal, and broadly sustainable development goals be promoted double purpose, both guiding Turkey's European integration accordingly with the post-COVID-19 global economic challenges and serving, thanks to its transformative power as a process, interests and values of the European citizens, including Turkish citizens. Let me add this, when Spain became a member to the European Union, it wasn't a 100% democracy, I assume, you know. It has also strengthened its democracy after it has become a member. Now, in the customs union, so far, to tell Turkey that we cannot start modernization customs union before you take steps to approach yourself to the EU values hasn't done the trick. Why not try the reverse? You know, start the customs union and trigger change in democratic process.
Well, thank you. what
And
offer
I'm going to ask you, I'm very sorry, but I'm going to ask you guys to keep your answers short so that we have two questions.
I'll try. Well, what we offer to Turkey? We offer to Turkey the big prize, the best, the gold award, the membership. Okay? There is nothing more than that. Turkey asked for the membership, and we open this path to the membership. And I'm happy that President Erdogan commit himself again about membership. For that, this is the maximum we can offer, and we offer, and we are open to maintain the issue. Second question: transactional stuff. I'm a politician. Transaction is my oxygen. I have no problem with the transactional thing. I stand for the migration deal before my colleagues from the left in Europe. And it's a transactional thing, and I think we have to put the transactional thing into the mix. There is no problem. There is no problem with that. About the question of the change of value. Well, first, there is the total. We can never isolate the custom union for the rest of the relation. This is it has been said. I don't want to insist on that. Specifically with the change of values. If we appreciate that in Turkey there is no a real judiciary free and fair, exempt to the political pressure, and we do think so, that this is not what is happening in Turkey. Could you consider that European companies could invest in Turkey without having the impression that any company could be sized for the power, like happened with COSA-IPEC group some years ago, a group having radio, televisions, and mining, and it was seized by them long before the coup. For that reason, we have why Turkey is losing progressively more and more foreign investment. It dropped from 1% of the global foreign investment to the 0.4. Something is happening in Turkey for not being so attractive. I don't want to study the monetary policies and so on, but this is happening. And I think if you want to be included in that new game of the strategic autonomy with the European Union, you have to commit yourself in both chapters. In the accession process, that means to improve really the state of democracy in Turkey, and in the legal certainty towards the companies. And now what we appreciate in Turkey is that when there is a judge deciding anything, it could be reprimanded publicly for the President of the Republic. And even after the reprimand, this judge is going to be disciplinary prosecuted. Do you really think that that offers the image of a country that is reliable to be included in the global, in the European change of value? You have to reflect on that.
Mr. Amor, there is a question that can come up as a follow-up to what you have just said from Mr. Anıl Özsar. You just said you're a politician, and you said that, you know, which European company would want to invest in Turkey. But here's the question, because as a politician, I guess you have to also represent the economic companies. The question says, COVID-19 response report prepared by EU industrialists last month. Last page refers directly to Turkey. EU private sector wants a custom union revision for Turkey. And it says, when EU political decisions will not cloud the real needs of EU, why not a bottom-up consideration of future politics? So the business wants revitalization of customs union. Apparently, they don't hesitate to come to Turkey.
Well, well, okay, thank you. It's very, very, very timely, this idea. Well, the first, I don't want to insist, this is the total frame of the relation we have to be into account. I know what Mr. Kozlowski said recently in a statement. We must inspire the same level of confidence in the economy, in the Turkish economy, as we have in our health system. It's a good idea, I think. But concerning the custom unions, what is the situation now? We are quarreling in the World Trade Organization about the current custom union frame. we are now having problems because Turkey apparently has launched a strategy that undermines the current custom unions, could help to advance to this new custom union, to not to reshuffle the older one, but really to reshape or to agree on another custom union. But the current situation in the custom unions is we are quarreling, Turkey and the European Union, before the World Trade Organization. And this is not the best. This is not the best step to start about. Anyway, I committed myself, and I did publicly in my last visit to Turkey, that the custom union is the only chapter, the only folder in which we have a narrow window of opportunity. And we have to try not to spoil that opportunity, because on the other side, on the accession process, there is no way in that moment to advance in any way. I committed myself to do, but the last resolution on the European Parliament threatened to suspend the custom union, because this is the feeling, this is the atmosphere here in the European Parliament. I do really think that the custom union is surviving the quarreling and the political positions in the Parliament, but we have to be aware that this is not the best atmosphere to launch another custom union, a reshaping of custom union, updating of custom union, when we have now serious problem in the current situation of the custom union as it is now.
I believe Mr. Günther Seufert would like to speak. There is a question, let me add also, maybe you want to touch upon as well, from Simay Erenoğlu, who says chapter 23 and 24 are of critical importance for Turkey's full accession goal, because they're about specifically democratic standards, but it's the Greek Cypriot administration which is blocking them. So does it help Turkey becoming more democratic or less democratic? That's my part of the answer. So, but Mr. Seufert, I think you wanted to also answer or make additional comments.
Very shortly, I always argued for the opening of 23 and 24, and I was very sorry that the European Union, even in 2015, when she very much depended on Turkey due to the refugee crisis, was not able or seemed not to be able to overcome the Cypriot position, because I think it also does not help the Cypriots to obstrue the membership process, because they only have the membership process and Turkish desire to be a part of Europe as a leverage against Ankara, and therefore I think the Greek Cypriot policy is leading nowhere. But very shortly to Mr. Amor, and I fully agree with him, having argued really strongly for the renegotiations, for entering into the renegotiations of the customs union, I think the Turkish business community, I'm sure it is aware, but I really want to underline it. We did research with different membership countries, in different countries of member states in the European Union, France, Italy, Spain, Poland, and Greece. And what we saw, that despite France and Germany, there is not really on a national level a discussion on the renegotiation of the membership of the customs union. And therefore, I think I was astonished hearing so often from the Turkish business community that this is one of the central goals, but it is very less reflected in the discussions on a national level. And therefore I see first the Turkish business community or Turkish diplomacy has to raise the issue in other membership countries, because we know it's Germany and France's position that is at the moment the official position of the Council, of the European Council. And therefore, if you want to change something, we have to go into other membership countries, because there is a willingness of the political elite, but there is no public debate and there is no organized business community. And the second remark, I think it's very important what we saw. I think in our research, we think that, or we saw a closing window of opportunity for Turkey when it comes to the customs union. And this has, as Mr. Amor said, very much to do with the skyrocketing numbers of trade disputes, with a non-functioning of the present customs union. It has to do with weakened trust in institutions due to the incredible, huge role of the President of State. Some companies feel threatened. Companies are in sorrow about the security of their employees. We see Turkey declining attractiveness of Turkey as a hub for regional market because Turkey is involved in so many foreign policy quarrels. And we see also that tendency that Turkey is becoming a matter of negative public debate in countries, also in countries who are until now very pro-Turkish. Italy, Spain, Poland. We have a very engaged public opinion in Germany and in France when it comes to Turkey. But we didn't have this in other membership countries. But now, due also to foreign policy developments or foreign policy of Turkey, and also naturally to this long period of decline when it comes to rule of law and human rights, we see that the atmosphere is changing even in countries that are traditionally pro-Turkish. And therefore, there is this closing window of opportunity for Turkey. And in my opinion, also a closing window for reviving Turkish-European cooperation as a whole.
Mustafa, Mr. Kutlay, would you do you want to raise an issue, or shall I continue with questions?
Well, actually, I want to say just one point quickly regarding the current nature of Turkey relations. I mean, when I look at the bilateral relations, I see a little bit more complex picture because, I mean, from Turkey's point of view, that's true. I mean, commitment to Copenhagen criteria, ensuring rule of law, consolidating political rights and civil liberties, these are obviously the key issues. I mean, Turkey, in order to become a member of the European Union, must adhere to these principles and improve its performance, its record, that's for sure. But credibility of commitment issue is not a one-sided game, I will say. From the EU's point of view as well, I think we should discuss credibility of commitment issues because, I mean, when we look at the worsening trend in bilateral relations, we see that it started in 2007, 2008, right? After 2006 Cyprus stalemate. But when we look at the illiberal turn in Turkish politics, it pretty much starts in 2011 onwards, right? So we see that from 2007 or 2008 onwards, we see that the relations existed in name, but not much in substance, because there occurred a credibility of commitment problem from the European Union's point of view as well. So I'm not saying that this is the main issue. I'm just saying that the current situation is a little bit complex. I mean, both sides need to, I think, reframe the way they approach the relationship. And also the European Union should perhaps be a little bit more clear about the long-term plans of the European Union when it comes to Turkey. And this is also quite important for the Turkish side, because I think in the post-COVID-19 era, we will be discussing the major issues with regard to political economy developments. I mean, bringing supply chains back in Europe, increasing regionalization in global political economy, or other sorts of economic integration issues. These are going to be important topics, and in order to address these issues in an effective manner, perhaps both sides must look at the way in which they could improve relations, because this is the only way to create a kind of win-win situation, I will say.
Now, this question sort of echoes what Mr. Kutlay has just said from Osman Sabri Kıratlı, who says, whenever I hear someone among EU circles say that Turkey should decide, it's on Turkey to move, etc., I get the impression that the EU does not want to do anything to improve the relations. In fact, that is the very mistake the EU has done in the last 10 years that moved Turkey further away from the EU's orbit. In other words, okay, you have a country like Turkey, and you just say Turkey is not moving. So the answer and the alternative is for the EU not to move at all. What's the alternative? And as an addition, I think someone has asked this question: do you think COVID-19 related research partnerships and medical supply chains could help improve the Turkey-EU relationships? Mr. Soyfa, maybe you can take this question.
Yes, but naturally it's difficult, because I fully agree with Mr. Kutlay that that Europe is naturally has to acknowledge its share in the worsening of the relationship, and I think at a very early stage of membership negotiations, Europe made Turkey suspicious of its intentions. And there was never an atmosphere that negotiations would at any cost or surely lead to membership. And this is, Europe has to acknowledge this. But this is a thing of the past. When it now comes to I don't know, I'm not an economist, but I think first Europe has to make up its mind if it is willingly or if it is risking. If it is willingly to risk to continue the relations with Turkey only in the membership process, because this will lead us to nowhere, or if Europe is willingly to open up a second channel for European policy towards Turkey. And I don't see another channel than concentrating on trade relations and on the customs union, but also on security relations. This is where Europe has to make up its mind. And I think when it comes to Turkey, we see that the Turkish business community itself is, there are different voices. There are naturally the perspective and the interests organized in TÜSİAD, but there also is another business community named MÜSİAD from the more conservative circle, and their economic visions, their priorities in regard to whom to cooperate, with whom to strengthen relations, are of a different kind. And I think it's up really also on the Turkish leadership to assure Europe that, for example, in the case of delocalization of production facilities, Turkey would be really a safe destination. I think proximity is very important, but it's also important is a particular foreseeability of political actions, of political steps. And when I only remind us on what happened late February, when Turkey all at once opened the borders for refugees and challenged in a way the security of Greece and the possibility of the European Union to deal with the problem. This was not a step that contributed to trust in the relationship. And therefore, I think it's both up to Europe if it is able to think about a different channel of cooperation and of institutionalized cooperation again, and it's up for Turkey if it presents itself as a secure destination for such significant production.
Thank you very much. Mr. Amor,
yeah.
I might address this question to you. It comes from a Turkish former EU envoy, Mr. Ambassador Selim Yenal, who used to be Turkey's envoy to the European Commission in Brussels. The question goes like that: do you really believe that the real reason for not opening talks on the custom union modernization, obviously, is political reform in Turkey? Is it not that some EU countries are not comfortable for such a modernization as they are worried about competition? EU countries are not always in tune with the European Commission on trade issues, says Mr. Yenal. And there is another question addressed to you, and maybe Mr. Kutlay might also want to take up that question later on. Is there a risk to lose Turkey to other poles like Russia and China when Europe goes ahead with its current strategy? And what would be the impact for Europe in this case?
Okay, well, first, I agree completely with Gunther. We have to offer, I always insist in that, we have to offer a credible path to the membership, because the membership is the frame of our relation currently. We could decide other ways to think, like Professor Kutlai offers, or other academies. But what we are now engaged is an accession process with some rules, and we have to follow this path, and we have to offer a credible path to Turkey. What if Turkey is complying with any chapter? It's going to happen at the end of the path, some political problem related to cultural or religious thing. We have to be clear on that, and Gunther is completely right on that. Concerning the custom unions, and there is some difficulties. No, we have to remind every person that we have a current custom unions agreement. We do have that, because sometimes it appears like it's a new goal. No, we have to update it, the custom union that exists, and exists despite some reluctances of some members. And in the frame of the current custom union, we have problems. Not need to mention what could be the answer of some member state if we are going to deepen custom union. But we have a custom union with problems. This is not the best layer, this is not the best foundations to build upon a new custom unions. Anyway, the competencies on our trade external policy is the European Union. There are not the countries, and we are signing agreements with Vietnam, with Mercosur, with Mexico, and there could be some reluctances, but we always have the means to solve that. Concerning Russia, I always heard about that. Are we afraid of the approaching of Turkey to Russia? No, we are not. I don't know if NATO have a different opinion, but we have, as an European Union, we are not in any way trying to undermine the sovereign right of Turkey to address the foreign policy that considered better for the country. And Russia is not a factor, at least for the moment. When I heard, no, you are acting in some way or another because there is a closer relation with Russia, I don't see that in the atmosphere in Brussels. I always tell to my Turkish colleagues, you are discovering early that your new powerful friends are far less reliable than the European Union. And you experience that with the United States, that you agree things on Syria in the same week you agree things with Putin on Syria, and you have been apparently abandoned by your new powerful friend, United States. We are far more reliable than these other partners, but you are free to buy this S-400. Of course, there are consequences of that, but okay, we are not in any way undermining the sovereign right of Turkey to address the foreign policy in one way or another. This is not a factor on the table and on the folder of the difficulties of the accession process or the difficulties on the other folder, the custom union.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amor. You want to take up from here, Mr. Kutlay, because in your views concerning the world of hybridity, you have also touched upon Turkey's different relations with different power centers. Could that be an asset, or it can turn into a liability, into a headache on Turkish-EU relations? But there's also one question addressed to you, and that's, but we're going to have to make it very short. What would be the main difference between differentiated integration and privileged partnership? Maybe just shortly on that and the other questions as well, because we're going to have to wrap up, and we still have some questions unanswered.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, as I said, we have entered an era, I think, characterized with increasing economic protectionism, more intense geopolitical rivalries, especially in the post-COVID-19 process. These supply chains turn out to be important issues. And we also see rifts in transatlantic alliance. So in such a kind of shifting order, I will say that I think it's possible for countries like Turkey to reconsider existing alliances or partnerships. I mean, this is likely, this is an option on the table. But let me reiterate my point again. I mean, when I look at the long-term economic and political development of countries, I think that the institutions are the most important determinants of long-term development of a country. And when we look at the issue from Turkey's point of view, I still think that the Western alliance and the European norms and values are still the most, I think, valuable parameters to ensure Turkey's long-term development. So from my point of view, EU partnership is quite important, and Turkey needs to invest in improving relations with the European Union. But I mean, the world is changing, improving relations with other actors. Obviously, this is going to be an option on the table. So this is my short answer to this first question. Regarding the second one, the difference between a privileged partnership and differentiated integration, I think the most important distinction between these two concepts is that in differentiated integration, the country participates in decision-making procedures. So that is probably the most important part. And this is secured through a set of institutional arrangements protected by European Union acquis communautaire. I mean, as I said, in the current context, this is not an option for candidate countries, and Mr. Amor clearly underlined this point. But if it happens one day, then the most important thing is that Turkey should also be included in decision-making procedures. And that is probably the most important concern for Turkish ruling elite regarding customs union, right? I mean, Turkey is obliged to obey the rules of EU external trade, but Turkish policymakers are not participating in decision-making procedures, and this creates huge political asymmetry problems. So these sort of political asymmetries need to be fixed in differentiated integration. Otherwise, we will be talking about privileged partnership, and I don't think that the Turkish policymakers or Turkish economic elites will agree on this, will accept privileged partnership as an alternative option.
Now, yes, you can. I'm just going to ask this question, and you can, bridge your answer, because the question is sort of echoing the last point Mr. Mustafa Kutlay has made, and that is the conference. It comes from Mr. A. Sezgin. The conference on the future of Europe should also include candidates so that they can decide their position in the new architecture of Europe. What is your opinion? In other words, will Europe come together, build a new architecture, and just say, Turkey, well, this is it, take it or leave it? Or will it say, you're an important partner, come and let's shape together? That would be my formulation of the questions, of course. But basically, the question is whether the conference on the future of Europe should include Turkey. Mr. Amor?
I think yes, clearly, and even I know there are some opinions, some non-papers. For example, the Spanish government launched a non-paper a week ago stating that we have to include not just the accession process, and even the neighbor process, the neighbor countries not being as entitled as Turkey and other candidates to do. For that reason, we don't want to have our partners inside this conference. We have to discuss on the status, but in any way, it's a good way. But concerning this differentiated integration of membership on that, we have to follow very closely what is happening with Brexit and the agreement with the United Kingdom. Professor Kutlay lives in London, if I understood well, and he's completely aware of the difficulties of that situation, because of course any country, and United Kingdom did that way, tried to maintain some privilege, some advantages, not having the difficulties. And for the European Union, it's a clear red line that the liberties of movement of capitals and persons and so on is a packet. You can simply pick up. I want that advantage, but I don't want to contribute in that way. And this is, of course, we have to be aware that any kind of privileged relation could trigger into the European Union some willing to do the same. I don't want the difficulties, I just want the advantages. This is a packet, this is the European acquis, what we call, and any country that wants to be member have to agree on the complex of the European acquis, and it is not possible to pick up some cherries and not others on the nest.
There is a question from Alper Uçok who says, should EU be afraid of China economically as China stretches its muscle in many areas? And maybe Günther Seufert can take this question. And we haven't touched upon so much on the migration deal, the refugee deal. There has been questions on that as well. Some questions are saying that it has done its deal, it's part of the deal that EU hasn't delivered. How do you think the refugee deal would look like in the near future? I know the two issues are separate, but I'm just wrapping up, you know.
Very, very shortly, naturally, Europe should be concerned about the economic strength and development of China, both naturally as an economic competitor, but also in the frame of what Professor Kutlay said, that we are here in a system, in a rivalry of systems, and that the performance or the leading performance of the liberal system is put into question today, and this is naturally a matter of concern. The question is how to deal with this new challenge, to deal in the way that you are, in a way, trying to simulate the competitor or to trust in your own model. I think this is the real question. When it comes to the migration deal, I think the migration deal will be continued because Europe, the member states are not able until now to design another asylum policy that really shares the burden, but also because despite all critique at the deal, I think the European contribution financially, but also when it comes to organizations and to creating models and to international cooperation, has significantly contributed to the ability of Turkey to live up to the challenge. And I think also, but what Europe should be reminded, and when the deal was struck in 2015, there had been additional promises of Europe, namely to proceed with the customs union, to talk about visa-free travel, and also to go forward in the membership process. Now, we are all agreed that there is no possibility now for a process for improvement in the membership process. But again, now we are on the other two issues, free travel, visa-free travel, and the customs union. Europe has to be reminded on its promises, and I think this would also help to ensure further cooperation in the refugee issue.
Well, we're just going to wrap up everyone, just one sentence or two sentences. Maybe you can tell us with what kind of a feeling you will be leaving this seminar. In 2 sentences, please, because I'm grateful to our listeners, but we are way above our time. In 2 sentences, last words or the feelings you're leaving this seminar. Mr. Kutlay?
Well, I think post-COVID-19 world is going to be full of opportunities and challenges, but in any case, it's not going to be an easy ride for global political economy and for Turkey relations, I suppose.
Thank you very much. Mr. Seufert?
No, I think the discussion really mirrored the structural challenges which Mr. Kutlay presented, and the difficulties both of Turkey and the European Union to find answers to it. But there is no other way than really to try to develop answers in this direction, because there will be no return to the old liberal order. From
Berlin, we go to Brussels. Mr. Amor.
Well, despite this not so dazzling political frame, I committed myself to do my best to revamp the relations. I dedicate about 50% of my time to Turkey in my daily life, and I will do my best to try to understand the situation, to be objective, to be propositive, and to try to help from the European Parliament a revamping of the relations between Turkey and the European Union.
Well, Mr. Amor, thank you very much. You already dedicated more than an hour of your time. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. And we also appreciate the participation of Mr. Kutla and Mr. Soyfert. And thank you very much for those who have been listening to us until now. We will be wrapping up. And don't forget, there will be a third part of the webinar series. The third part would be on the business dimension of Turkish-EU relations, and there we will find out what the European business community thinks and what the Turkish community thinks. Until then, keep watching the webinar series of TÜSİAD together with Institut du Bosphore and Berlin Bosphorus Initiative. My name is Barçın Ginanç. I'm wishing you all a very nice afternoon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Professor and Gunther.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
London and Brussels. Thank you.